poor black single dad is being mocked for inheriting a junk farmhouse until a 120 million secret is uncovered. The town hall is packed. 200 people crammed into folding chairs, the air thick with the smell of old wood and stale coffee. Every eye is on the man at the microphone. Connor Hastings leans into it like he owns the room. Because he does. Third-generation coal money. Designer suit that costs more than most people here make in a month. His voice booms across the space, dripping with contempt. This man, he says, pointing to the back row, doesn't know the first thing about mining or geology or what this land means. The camera finds his target, a broad-shouldered black man in work clothes, sitting perfectly still, hands folded on his lap, dark skin catching the fluorescent light, graying temples, scars on his knuckles that tell stories he's never shared. Beside him, a little girl clutches a backpack. 8 years old, braids coming loose. She's staring at her father, waiting for him to move. He doesn't. You're a truck driver, Hastings continues, voice rising. You deliver couches, and you expect us to believe you know something we don't? Laughter ripples through the crowd, not from everyone, but enough. The man in the back row stands slowly, the kind of slow that makes people stop laughing. Actually, he says, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, I know quite a bit about geology. Hastings grins. Oh, really? Enlighten us. The man reaches into his jacket. And this is where everything changes. But what he pulls out, what it proves, what it destroys, that's a story you need to hear from the beginning. If you believe that power without integrity is just noise, stay with this story. Because what happens next will shatter every assumption in that room and prove that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a man who's been silent for a reason. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who they were talking to? To understand how a delivery driver brought a coal baron to his knees, we need to go back 3 weeks to a quiet morning in Detroit before the inheritance letter arrived. Terry Shaw woke at 5 in the morning, the way he did every day. His alarm never sounded. His body knew the rhythm by now. The apartment was quiet. 2 bedrooms on Detroit's east side, 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The radiator clanked softly. Outside the window, street lights painted orange squares on the opposite wall. He moved through the dark without turning on lights. Kitchen first. Coffee on. Eggs in the pan. By the time Imani shuffled in, still half asleep in her pajamas, breakfast was waiting. Morning, baby, Terry said. She mumbled something that might have been words and climbed into her chair. Her hair was a mess of coils and tangles flattened on one side from sleep. Terry set a plate in front of her and pulled out the comb. Dad, Imani said, suddenly awake. Why do rocks have different colors? Terry worked the comb through a section of her hair, gentle and methodical. His hands were scarred from years of hard work, dark skin rough across the knuckles. But his touch was careful. Minerals, he said. Different minerals make different colors. Iron makes rocks red. Copper makes them green. What makes them purple? Manganese. Sometimes quartz if the light hits it right. Imani tilted her head, considering this. Terry moved with her, keeping the tension even as he started the first braid. Where does metal come from, she asked. The earth. Deep down, metal's just rock that got hot enough to change. How hot? Thousands of degrees. She was quiet for a moment, chewing her eggs. Then, is that hotter than the oven? Terry smiled. A lot hotter. He finished the first braid and started the second. The morning light was coming through the window now, soft and gray. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. A car alarm went off in the street below and stopped. By 6:30, Imani was dressed and fed. Terry walked her to the bus stop 3 blocks away, her hand small in his. She talked the whole way, jumping between subjects like she was crossing stones in a creek. At 7, Terry was at the warehouse. The building squatted on the edge of an industrial park, all concrete and corrugated metal. Inside, rows of flat-pack furniture boxes stretched toward a ceiling stained with decades of exhaust and dust. Terry clocked in, loaded his truck, checked the day's route. His coworkers nodded at him as they passed. A few said good morning. Most knew him as the quiet guy who never called in sick, never complained, never caused problems. The guy who'd take the double shift if you needed it. Nobody asked him questions. Terry drove his first delivery at 7:30. A dresser and a nightstand to a house on the west side. The woman who answered the door was in her 70s, moving slow. Terry carried both pieces up a narrow staircase that smelled like old carpet and cooking oil. You need help putting these together? He asked. She nodded, grateful. Terry stayed an extra 20 minutes, assembling the furniture in her bedroom. She offered him water. He accepted. She asked if he had kids. He said yes, one daughter. She told him he seemed like a good father. He thanked her and left. The day continued like that. Apartment buildings with broken elevators. Houses where dogs barked behind chain-link fences. People who paid in installments, $50 at a time, for furniture that would last maybe 5 years. Terry moved through it all with the same quiet efficiency, lifting, carrying, assembling. His shoulders were broad, his back still strong at 42. The work didn't bother him. It was simple. It asked nothing of him except his body. At 3:15, he picked Imani up from school. She climbed into the passenger seat of his truck, backpack heavy with books. "How was your day?" Terry asked. "Marcus threw up in art class. Is he okay? I think he ate too much glue." Terry pulled into traffic. "Why was he eating glue?" "I don't know. Marcus does weird stuff." They stopped at the grocery store on the way home. Imani pushed the cart while Terry picked out chicken and rice and vegetables. She asked if they could get cookies. He said yes. She picked the kind with chocolate chips. At home, Terry helped her with homework at the kitchen table. Math first, then reading. She was good at both, but she rushed through problems, impatient to get to the answer. "Slow down," Terry said. "Check your work." She groaned but went back and found the mistake. By 6, dinner was on the stove. By 7, they'd eaten and cleaned up. By 8, Imani was in her pajamas again, teeth brushed, reading a book in bed. Terry sat beside her, listening to her sound out the harder words. When she finished the chapter, she looked up at him. "Dad?" "Yeah, baby? Do you know everything about rocks?" Terry smiled. "No, nobody knows everything. But you know a lot. I know some things." She studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp even when she was tired. "How do you know so much?" Terry's smile faded slightly. He looked at the book in her hands, not quite meeting her eyes. "I used to read a lot." "About rocks?" "About lots of things." She seemed satisfied with that. She turned back to her book, already starting the next chapter. Terry stayed until she fell asleep. Then he went to the kitchen and started packing lunch for tomorrow. The knock came at 9:15. Terry opened the door to find the building manager, a tired-looking man in his 50s who always wore the same stained jacket. "Certified letter for you," he said, holding out an envelope. "Needed a signature. Mailman left it with me." Terry took it, signed the clipboard. The manager left without another word. Terry stood in the doorway, staring at the envelope. Official-looking. Return address from a law office in West Virginia. Imani's voice came from behind him. "Dad, what is it?" He turned. She was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, hair still in the braids he'd done that morning. "Nothing, baby. Go back to bed." "But what?" "It's nothing. I'll tell you in the morning." She hesitated, then nodded and disappeared back into her room. Terry closed the door. He stood in the kitchen, the envelope in his hands, and didn't open it. Terry didn't open the letter for 3 days. It sat on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, sealed and waiting. Every morning he saw it while making breakfast. Every evening he walked past it on his way to bed. Imani asked about it twice. He told her it was probably nothing important. On Thursday night, after dinner, she climbed onto the chair beside him and looked at the envelope. "You still didn't open it," she said. Terry dried his hands on a dish towel. "I will." "When?" "Soon." She picked up the envelope and turned it over. "It says it's from a law office." "I know. Are you in trouble?" Terry almost smiled. "No, baby, I'm not in trouble." "Then why won't you open it?" He looked at her. 8 years old, braids coming loose at the ends, eyes too sharp for her age. She was watching him the way she always did when she knew he was hiding something. Terry took the envelope from her hands. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open. The letter was 2 pages, printed on expensive paper. Legal letterhead from a firm in Charleston, West Virginia. Terry scanned the first paragraph and stopped. Imani leaned closer. "What does it say?" Terry read it again, slower this time. His grandfather Ezra Shaw had died. Heart failure. 3 weeks ago. The funeral had already happened. There was property. 180 acres in McDowell County. Left to Terry in the will. "Dad?" Terry set the letter down. 4 photographs were clipped to the second page. He pulled them free and spread them on the table. The first showed a 2-story farmhouse, gray and sagging. The roof had caved in on one side, exposing black tar paper and rotted beams. Kudzu climbed the walls like he was trying to pull the whole structure into the ground. The second photo showed rusted equipment scattered across bare dirt, old tractor parts, corroded barrels, scraps of metal half buried in weeds. The third was a field, dead grass and eroded soil stretching toward a tree line. The fourth was a creek. The water was orange. "What is that?" Imani asked, pointing at the creek. "Runoff," Terry said quietly, "from mining." She studied the photos. "Is that your grandfather's house?" It was. "Did you know him?" Terry shook his head. "I met him twice. I was a kid." Imani picked up the photo of the farmhouse. She tilted it, examining the details. It looked sad. Terry didn't disagree. He picked up the phone and dialed a number on the letterhead. A receptionist answered, transferred him, put him on hold. Generic piano music played for 90 seconds. Then a man's voice came on the line. "Mr. Shaw?" "Yes." "This is Dennis Carver. I'm handling your grandfather's estate. Did you receive my letter?" "I'm looking at it now. I'm very sorry for your loss." Terry said nothing. Carver cleared his throat. "I'm sure you have questions about the property. I can walk you through the details if what's it worth?" Terry asked. A pause. "Well, that's complicated. The land has been assessed at approximately $35,000, mostly for scrap value. The house itself is structurally unsound. There's also an outstanding lien of $11,000 in back taxes and utility debt." Terry looked at the photos again. "So I'd inherit debt?" "Essentially, yes. You have the option to disclaim the inheritance. Many people in your position choose to do that. It's a perfectly reasonable decision." Imani was still holding the photo of the farmhouse. She traced her finger along the roofline. "Can I see it first?" Terry asked. Another pause. "The property?" "Yes. Of course. You're welcome to inspect it before making a decision. Though I should warn you, it's in considerably worse condition than the photos suggest. The structure is unsafe to enter. The land has environmental issues from the abandoned coal operation next door. Honestly, Mr. Shaw, you'd be better off disclaiming it and saving yourself the headache." Terry watched Imani studying the photograph. She looked up at him. "Can we go see it?" she whispered. Terry's jaw tightened. He hadn't been back to Appalachia in 20 years, hadn't thought about those mountains, that accent, the way the air smelled like coal dust and rain. Hadn't let himself remember. But Imani was looking at him with those eyes that always saw more than they should. "I'll let you know," Terry said into the phone. "Take your time. The estate won't be finalized for at least 60 days. If you have any questions." Terry hung up. Imani set the photo down carefully. "Are we going?" "I don't know yet. I want to see it. It's a long drive, baby, and there's nothing there. Just a broken-down house." "But it was your grandfather's." Terry looked at the photos again. The ruined farmhouse, the poisoned creek, the dead fields. Nothing worth keeping, nothing worth the drive. But Imani was still watching him, waiting for an answer that made sense. And Terry couldn't explain why a part of him wanted to see it anyway. Wanted to stand on land that had belonged to a man he barely remembered. Wanted to know what Ezra had left behind. "Thanksgiving weekend," Terry said finally. "We'll drive down, look at it, then we'll decide." Imani's face lit up. "Really? Just to look, that's all." She threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him off the chair. Terry caught her, held her steady, felt the warmth of her small body against his chest. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. Terry looked at the photos over her head, at the farmhouse that was falling into itself, at the creek that ran the wrong color, at the inheritance nobody in their right mind would accept. He told himself it was just to assess the property, just to see it once before walking away. But somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he'd locked away 12 years ago, something shifted. They left Detroit at dawn on Thanksgiving morning. The highways were empty. Most people were already home, gathered around tables loaded with food and family. Terry drove south through Ohio, then caught I-64 into West Virginia. Imani slept for the first 3 hours, curled against the passenger door with her jacket bunched under her head. When she woke, the landscape had changed. Mountains rose on both sides of the highway, dark green and steep. The sky was gray. "Are we close?" she asked. "Another hour." She pressed her face to the window, watching the trees blur past. Terry's hands gripped the wheel a little tighter as they drove deeper into coal country. Towns appeared and disappeared, most of them half abandoned. Boarded storefronts, rusted mining equipment sitting in yards like broken monuments, signs for churches that might not exist anymore. He hadn't been back here in 20 years, hadn't wanted to be. The GPS took them off the highway onto a 2-lane road that wound through valleys scarred by strip mining. Then onto a dirt road that climbed into hills where the trees grew thicker. The truck rattled over potholes and exposed roots. "There," Terry said. The farmhouse appeared through the trees like something the forest was trying to swallow. 2 stories, gray wood, sagging in the middle where the roof had given way. Kudzu covered the entire left side, thick green vines crawling up the walls and into the broken windows. Terry stopped the truck in what might have once been a driveway. Imani got out slowly. She stood beside the truck, staring. "It's worse than the pictures," she said. Terry couldn't argue. The photos hadn't captured the smell wet rot and mildew and something chemical underneath, or the way the porch listed to one side, steps crumbling into splinters, or the sheer weight of abandonment that hung over the place like fog. He walked toward the house, boots crunching on ground that was more gravel than soil. The front door hung open, half off its hinges. "Don't go inside," Terry said. Imani nodded. She was already moving toward the side of the property, drawn by curiosity or maybe just the need to look at anything besides the wreck of the house. Terry stood in what had been the main yard. Bare dirt, dead weeds, a rusted water pump lying on its side. Beyond that, fields stretched toward a tree line, empty, eroded, useless. And past the fields, barely visible through the trees, he could see the creek. The water was orange. Terry walked toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last. The smell got stronger as he got closer. Sulfur and iron and decay. The creek ran through a shallow ravine, slow-moving and thick. The rocks along the banks were stained rust red. Nothing grew near the water. He knelt and touched the ground. The soil felt dead, no give to it, no life. This was what runoff did. This was what happened when mining companies dumped their waste and walked away. Terry stood. His jaw tightened. Somewhere in his chest, anger flickered quiet and controlled. But there. Behind him, Imani called out, "Dad, there's a shed!" Terry turned. She was standing near a small outbuilding half hidden behind the house, its door hanging open. He walked over. The shed was in better shape than the house newer, or at least maintained longer. Inside, shelves lined the walls, sagging under the weight of glass jars and cardboard boxes and stacks of yellowed paper. Imani was already inside, examining everything with wide eyes. "Look," she said, holding up a jar. "There's rocks in all of them." Terry stepped closer. She was right. Mason jars filled the shelves, each one containing rock samples. Labels were taped to the lids, handwritten in faded ink, dates, coordinates, notes in cramped script. Terry picked up one jar. The label read, April 12, 1987, North Ridge 2 Sovereign meters east of Creek Bend. Inside was a chunk of dull gray rock, rough and unremarkable. His hands went cold. "Dad?" Terry set the jar down carefully. He picked up another. Same gray rock. Different date. Different coordinates. He opened a box on the shelf below. Inside were maps hand-drawn, meticulous, covering the property and the surrounding land. Elevations marked. Geological formations sketched in pencil. Survey lines running across the paper like veins. And beneath the maps, a journal. Leather-bound, thick, held together with a rubber band that crumbled when Terry touched it. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was the same as the jar labels. Ezra Shaw. January 3rd, 1965. Terry flipped through the pages. Dates, observations, sketches of rock formations, chemical compositions written in shorthand, calculations. His grandfather had been documenting this land for nearly 60 years. "What is all this stuff?" Imani asked. Terry didn't answer. He was staring at a jar she'd picked up, turning it over in her small hands. "Dad, what's this?" She held it out to him. Terry took it. The rock inside was the same dull gray as the others. Colton, he'd seen it 1,000 times in his old life. Knew its weight, its texture, the way light sat on its surface. Colton was rare, valuable, essential for manufacturing electronics. Phones, laptops, medical equipment. Most of it came from Central Africa. Finding it in Appalachia was almost unheard of. But here it was, jar after jar of it. Terry's breath caught. He looked at the label .987, the same year he was born. Ezra had known. For decades, he'd known what was buried here. "Dad?" Imani was watching him with that look she got when she knew something was wrong but didn't understand what. Terry set the jar down. His hands were shaking. He walked out of the shed and stood in the yard, breathing hard. His mind was racing, pulling up everything he knew about mineral deposits, geological formations, extraction methods. He looked at the land with new eyes, not seeing the ruin, but seeing what lay beneath it. The slope of the hills, the orientation of the ridges, the way the creek cut through the valley. If the samples were right, if Ezra's documentation was accurate, this wasn't just a few isolated pockets of coltan. This was a deposit. Imani came out of the shed holding the journal. "There's writing in here about rocks and chemicals and stuff. It sounds like the things you tell me." Terry took the journal from her hands. He flipped to a random page. Read 3 lines. Closed it. His grandfather hadn't been an amateur. The work was precise, professional. The kind of documentation Terry had done himself, back when that was his life. "Why are you looking at everything like that?" Imani asked. "Like what?" "Like you're measuring it in your head." Terry looked down at her. She was too smart. Always had been. "I'm just thinking," he said. "About what?" "About the fact that this worthless land might not be worthless at all. About the fact that his grandfather had left him something that could change everything. About the fact that he'd walked away from geology 12 years ago and swore he'd never go back. But he didn't say any of that." "Come on," Terry said. "Let's look at the rest of the property." He walked the land for the next hour while Imani explored. He moved methodically, studying sight lines and elevations, checking the angle of the ridges against the creek bed, estimating depth and spread based on surface indicators he shouldn't still remember how to read. But he did remember, all of it. Imani followed him, asking questions he answered without thinking. By the time the sun started to sink, Terry had walked every accessible acre, and he knew this was real. "Dad," Imani said as they stood near the truck, ready to leave. "Why were you walking around like you were looking for something?" Terry looked at her. Then at the ruined farmhouse. Then at the hills rising behind it, hiding secrets that had been waiting for someone who understood what they meant. "Because I was," he said quietly. Terry woke before dawn in the truck, his back stiff from sleeping across the front seat. Imani was curled in the back, still asleep under his jacket. The windows were fogged with their breath. He'd parked near the farmhouse last night after deciding the structure was too dangerous to sleep in. The cold had settled deep by morning. Terry could see frost on the grass outside. He climbed out quietly, careful not to wake Imani. The air bit at his face. His breath came out in clouds. The property looked different in early light, less ruined somehow. Or maybe he was just seeing it through different eyes now, not as something to walk away from, but as something worth understanding. Terry walked to the shed and retrieved 3 mason jars of samples. He'd spent half the night reading Ezra's journal by flashlight, cross-referencing coordinates with the hand-drawn maps. If his grandfather's documentation was accurate, the Colton wasn't just in one spot. It ran through the ridge in a vein that could extend hundreds of meters. But he needed to confirm it himself. Terry knelt in the dirt near the creek bed and pulled out a pocket knife. He scraped at exposed rock, collecting fragments in a plastic bag he'd found in the truck's glove box. Not scientific equipment, not even close to proper methodology, but enough to get a sense of what he was dealing with. The sound of engines broke the morning quiet. Terry stood, turned. 3 vehicles were coming up the dirt road, kicking up dust despite the frost. A black luxury SUV led the way, followed by a contractor's truck and a sedan. They pulled into the yard and stopped. The SUV's door opened. A man stepped out. He was in his mid-60s, thick around the middle, with a red face that suggested either high blood pressure or a temper that ran hot. His suit was expensive tailored dark gray, paired with boots that cost more than Terry made in a month. Everything about him said money. Old money. The kind that expected deference. 2 men climbed out of the contractor's truck. Workers, from the look of them. A younger man in a cheaper suit emerged from the sedan, carrying a leather briefcase. The older man walked toward Terry with the confidence of someone who owned everything he could see. "You must be Ezra's grandson," he said. His voice had a drawl that sat somewhere between friendly and patronizing. Terry set down the sample bag, wiped his hands on his jeans. "I am." The man extended a hand. "Connor Hastings. I own the land adjacent to this property. I'm very sorry for your loss." Terry shook his hand. Hastings's grip was firm, performative, the kind of handshake meant to establish hierarchy. "Ezra was a good man," Hastings continued, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Stubborn as hell, but good. We had our disagreements over the years, but I respected him." Terry said nothing. Hastings looked past him at the farmhouse, at the collapsed roof and kudzu-covered walls. "Shame what happened to this place. Time gets everything eventually, doesn't it?" The lawyer stepped forward, opening his briefcase. "Mr. Hastings has asked me to present you with an offer." "An offer?" Terry asked. "For the property," Hastings said. "I know you've got a life up in Detroit. Job responsibilities. Last thing you need is to be tied down to a piece of land you can't use." He gestured at the ruin around them. "Let's be honest, friend. What are you going to do with a toxic waste site?" Terry looked at the Orange Creek, at the dead fields, at the evidence of poisoning that had been deliberate, systematic, decades in the making. "I haven't decided yet," Terry said. Hastings smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Well, I'd like to make that decision easier for you. I'm prepared to offer $50,000 cash today. No inspection, no contingencies. You sign the deed over, and you can be back in Detroit by Sunday. The lawyer pulled out papers, already prepared. Terry didn't look at them. I need time to think about it. Hastings' smile tightened. Time to think about what? You've seen the property. It's worthless. The house is condemned. The land is contaminated. You'd be doing yourself a favor taking this offer. Maybe, Terry said, but I still need time. Hastings' expression shifted. The friendly mask slipped just enough to show what was underneath. He looked Terry up and down, taking in the work clothes, the scuffed boots, the truck with Michigan plates. You're a truck driver, Hastings said. Slower now, louder, making sure the workers behind him could hear. Is that right? Terry's jaw tightened. That's right. You deliver furniture. I do. Hastings' voice dropped into something harder. So help me understand. What exactly do you think you're going to do here? You think you're going to fix this place up? Turn it into something? Terry met his eyes, said nothing. Because I've been dealing with this land for 40 years, Hastings continued. I know every acre of this county. I know the environmental regulations, the zoning laws, the cost of remediation. And I can promise you, friend, whatever you're thinking, it's not going to work. The porch creaked. Terry glanced over. Imani was standing there in her jacket, watching. Hastings followed his gaze, looked at her, looked back at Terry. His expression shifted into something uglier. You think you're going to outlawyer me? Hastings asked. Outspend me? You deliver couches for a living. You think you can fight me? Terry's hands curled into fists at his sides. His breathing slowed. Boy, Hastings said, the word landing like a slap. I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging me to take this shithole off your hands. The silence that followed was absolute. Terry stood perfectly still. His face showed nothing, but something in his posture had changed, spine straightening, shoulders squaring, the stance of a man who'd been pushed far enough. Hastings must have seen it. He stepped back, just slightly. Think about my offer, he said, his voice returning to something closer to cordial. You've got my number. Don't wait too long. He turned and walked back to the SUV. The lawyer followed, briefcase still open. The workers climbed into their truck without a word. The engine started. Gravel crunched under tires. Terry watched them drive away, dust rising in their wake until the vehicles disappeared into the trees. Imani came down from the porch. She stopped beside him, looking at the road where the SUV had been. Who was that? She asked. Someone who wants this land, Terry said. Why? Terry looked at her. At his 8-year-old daughter who asked questions that cut straight to the center of things. I don't know yet, he said, but I'm going to find out. 2 days later, Terry sat in the McDowell County Public Library with Imani beside him, a stack of geological survey maps spread across the table. The library was small, one room with fluorescent lights humming overhead and shelves that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 90s. The librarian, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, had given Terry a surprised look when he'd asked for access to the reference computer and archival records. Most people just want the internet, she'd said. Terry didn't want the internet. He wanted data. Imani sat with her own stack of books about rocks and minerals, flipping pages and occasionally asking questions Terry answered without looking up. His focus was absolute. He moved through property records, cross-referencing deed transfers with geological surveys filed with the state. His fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory he thought he'd forgotten. He pulled up a database of mineral assessments, entered coordinates, narrowed search parameters using terminology that came back to him like a language he'd stopped speaking but never truly lost. The librarian walked past, glanced at his screen, stopped. Are you a geologist? She asked. Terry's hands paused on the keyboard. I used to be. She looked at him at his work clothes, his scarred hands, the way he carried himself, and something in her expression shifted. Curiosity, maybe, or doubt. Well, she said, let me know if you need anything. She walked away. Terry went back to work. An hour later, he'd mapped the entire ridge system surrounding Ezra's property. The geological formations matched what he'd suspected. Metamorphic rock, pressure formed, the right composition and age to contain coltan deposits. The creek bed showed evidence of erosion that would expose deeper mineral layers over time. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. This wasn't a fluke. This was real. Terry pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts he hadn't looked at in 12 years. Found a name. Dr. Yolanda Reese. He stepped outside to make the call. The air was cold, carrying the smell of wood smoke from someone's chimney. Terry stood in the library parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, listening to it ring. She answered on the third ring. "Hello, Yolanda, it's Terry Shaw." Silence. Then, "Terry? Terry Shaw?" "Yeah, I'll be damned." Her voice was warm, surprised. "I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. It's been, what, 12 years? About that. Where are you? What are you doing?" Terry looked at the mountains rising in the distance. "West Virginia. I inherited some property. I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "I need access to testing equipment, spectrometry, chemical analysis. I've got samples I need verified." Another pause. When Yolanda spoke again, her voice had shifted into something more careful. "What kind of samples?" "Mineral, possibly coltan." "Coltan in Appalachia?" "That's what I need to confirm." Yolanda was quiet for a moment. Terry could hear background noise, lab sounds, equipment humming, people talking. She was still doing the work, still in the field he'd walked away from. "You can ship them to my lab," she said. "I'll run them myself, no questions. Thank you, Terry." Her voice softened. "It's good to hear from you, I mean that." Terry's throat tightened. "You too. Are you okay?" Really? He thought about Diane, about the funeral, about the 12 years he'd spent delivering furniture and braiding his daughter's hair and trying not to think about what he'd lost. "I'm working on it," he said. They hung up. Terry stood in the parking lot for another minute, breathing cold air, before going back inside. Imani looked up when he sat down. "Who were you talking to? An old friend? From when you used to read a lot?" Terry almost smiled. "Something like that." He spent another hour at the library, printing maps and survey reports. When they finally left, his arms were full of paper and his mind was full of calculations he hadn't made in over a decade. That night, in a motel room 20 miles from the property, Terry prepared soil samples while Imani slept. He worked carefully, methodically, using a pocket knife and plastic bags because he didn't have proper equipment. He labeled each sample with coordinates and depth estimates, then packaged them for shipping. His phone sat on the table beside him, screen dark. On it was a photo he hadn't looked at in years. Diane, 28 years old, standing in front of a mining site in Montana, hard hat pushed back on her head, grinning at the camera. Her dark skin glowed in the sunlight. Her eyes were bright with excitement about whatever discovery they'd just made. Terry picked up the phone, stared at the photo. Imani stirred in the bed behind him. "Dad?" He turned. She was sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "Go back to sleep, baby." "What are you looking at?" Terry hesitated. Then he turned the phone so she could see the screen. Imani climbed out of bed and came over. She looked at the photo for a long time. "That's Mom," Terry said quietly. "She looks happy." She was. What was she doing? Working. She was a scientist. She studied rocks and minerals like I used to. Imani touched the screen gently. "Did she teach you about rocks?" "We taught each other." Imani looked up at him. "Is that why you know so much? Because of her?" Terry's chest felt tight. "Partly. What happened to her?" He told Imani the basics when she was old enough to ask. An accident, far away, before Imani was born. But he'd never given her details, never explained the mining collapse in Johannesburg, never told her about the 3 days he'd spent waiting for them to recover Diane's body. She was doing work she loved, Terry said, and something went wrong. It wasn't her fault. It just happened. Imani was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned against him, small and warm. "I wish I could have met her." "Me too, baby." They sat like that for a while. The motel room was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the distant sound of trucks on the highway. Finally, Imani went back to bed. Terry finished packaging the samples. He wrote Yolanda's address on the box in careful letters. 3 days later, she called him. "Terry," she said, "you need to sit down." He was driving back to Detroit, Imani asleep in the passenger seat. Terry pulled over into a rest stop. "What did you find?" "It's coltan, high grade, minimal impurities. The concentration suggests a significant deposit, not just trace amounts." Terry's hands gripped the steering wheel. "How significant?" "Based on these samples. If the vein extends even a quarter of what the geological indicators suggest, you're looking at one of the largest economically viable coltan deposits in North America." Terry closed his eyes. "What's it worth?" he asked. Yolanda was quiet for a moment. "Conservatively, 120 million, maybe more." The highway stretched ahead of them, gray and endless. Terry sat in his truck in a rest stop in Ohio, holding a phone to his ear, learning that the worthless land everyone told him to walk away from was worth more than he'd see in 10 lifetimes. But all he could think about was Ezra. spending 58 years documenting this secret, refusing every offer, waiting for someone who'd understand. Terry? Yolanda's voice came through the phone. You still there? Yeah, he said. I'm here. Terry filed the first permit application on a Monday morning from his apartment in Detroit. Environmental assessment request for mineral extraction, McDowell County, West Virginia. He filled out every line by hand, attached Yolanda's lab results, included geological surveys and impact projections he'd worked on until 3 in the morning. He mailed it certified, waited for confirmation. The rejection came back in 4 days. Insufficient documentation. Application denied. Terry read the letter twice. The documentation wasn't insufficient. It was textbook. He'd done this kind of paperwork 100 times in his old life. He filed again. Different forms, more detail, additional environmental impact assessments he'd pulled from his own research. Denied. Incomplete site survey. The third application came back with a note clipped to the front. Applications from non-residents require county board approval. Please schedule a hearing. Terry called the number on the form. Got voicemail. Called again the next day. Same thing. Left 3 messages over a week. Nobody called back. He tried hiring a local environmental consulting firm to help navigate the process. Found one in Charleston that specialized in remediation work. The woman who answered sounded professional, interested even, until Terry mentioned the property location. I'm sorry, she said. We're not taking new clients right now. When will you be? I couldn't say. I'll put you on a wait list. She hung up before he could respond. Terry tried 2 more firms. Same story. Polite refusals. Doors closing. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. At work, Terry loaded furniture into his truck and thought about Hastings. About the way power worked when it had been in one family's hands for 3 generations. About how many people owed favors to a man who'd employed half the county at one point or another. His phone rang during lunch break. Unknown number. Mr. Shaw, this is the McDowell County Commission office. We received your request to speak at next month's public comment period. Yes, I submitted that 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, we've had to remove you from the schedule. The agenda is full. Full? It's a public comment period. Yes, but we have a limit on speakers. You're welcome to submit written comments instead. I want to present in person. The voice on the other end became cooler. Written comments will be distributed to all commissioners. It's actually more effective. When's the next open slot? I'd have to check. Could be several months. Terry's jaw tightened. I'll submit written comments, but I want to be scheduled for the next available meeting. Of course, we'll be in touch. They wouldn't be. Terry knew that before he hung up. The article appeared in the McDowell Gazette 3 days later. Detroit delivery driver claims valuable discovery on inherited land. Terry found it online. Someone had emailed him the link, an anonymous message with no text, just the URL. The article was short, factual on the surface, poisonous underneath. It mentioned Terry's inheritance, his job as a furniture delivery driver, his claims about mineral deposits worth millions. It quoted an unnamed source saying the property had been assessed at $35,000 and carried significant environmental liabilities. The source clearly, Hastings or his lawyer described Terry as an out-of-town opportunist with no geological expertise who was making unfounded claims to drive up property value. At the bottom of the article, almost as an afterthought, was Terry's phone number, listed as public record from the property deed. The first call came that night. Terry didn't recognize the number. Yeah, is this Terry Shaw? Who's calling? You the one trying to scam people with that fake mineral deposit story. Terry hung up. The second call came 20 minutes later. A different voice, same anger. People like you come down here, lie about what you got, try to make us look stupid. Terry hung up again, turned off his phone, but the calls kept coming. Over the next week, his voicemail filled with messages. Some were hostile, some accused him of fraud. One threatened legal action. A few were just cruel, mocking him for being delusional enough to think he'd found something valuable. Imani was doing homework at the kitchen table when Terry's phone rang for the 5th time in an hour. He'd turned the sound back on, thinking it might be Yolanda or the county office. It wasn't. Listen, you piece of... Terry ended the call. His hands were shaking, not from fear. From anger he was working very hard to control. Dad? Imani looked up from her math worksheet. Why do people keep calling you? Terry set the phone down. It's nothing, baby. But they sound mad. They are mad. Why? Terry sat across from her. Outside, the evening was settling into darkness. Car horns echoed from the street. Someone's music thumped through the walls. Because I'm trying to do something they don't understand, Terry said. And someone's telling them lies about me. The man from the farmhouse? The one with the fancy car? Terry nodded. Imani's brow furrowed. Why is he lying? Because he wants the land, and he doesn't want me to have it. But it's yours. Grandpa Ezra left it to you. I know. So why can't you just keep it? Terry looked at his 8-year-old daughter and tried to find words that would make sense to her. Sometimes people in power don't like being challenged. They're used to getting what they want. When someone says no, they use that power to make things hard. Imani was quiet for a moment. Then, that's not fair. No, Terry said. It's not. She went back to her homework. Terry sat there, watching her work through multiplication problems with the same focus she brought to everything, and felt something harden in his chest. The envelope arrived 5 days later. Official county seal, certified mail. Inside was a notice. Mandatory public hearing, unauthorized mineral surveying on private property. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening at the McDowell County Town Hall. All interested parties were invited to attend. Comments would be heard from both the property owner and concerned citizens. Terry read it 3 times. This wasn't a permit hearing. This wasn't even about the applications he'd filed. This was Hastings setting a stage, creating a public forum where he could paint Terry as a con artist in front of the whole community. Terry set the notice on the table. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. The message played automatically. The voice loud enough for Imani to hear from across the room. You think you're going to come down here and steal from people? We know who you are. We know what you're trying to pull. Imani's eyes went wide. Terry deleted the message, turned the phone off, sat in the silence that followed. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to decide if he was going to walk into that town hall and face whatever Hastings had planned. 2 weeks to figure out how to fight a man who controlled every lever of power in the county. 2 weeks to choose between staying safe and invisible or stepping into the light and risking everything he'd built over the past 12 years. He looked at the notice again, at the date and time, at the address of the town hall where 200 people would gather to hear Hastings explain exactly why Terry Shaw didn't belong. And Terry made a decision that would change the rest of his life. Terry left Detroit on a Tuesday morning, alone. He'd told Imani he needed to prepare for the meeting. She'd asked if she could come. He'd said no, not yet, and kissed her forehead before dropping her at his neighbor's apartment. The drive south felt longer this time, heavier. He arrived at the property just before sunset. The farmhouse looked worse in the fading light, more broken, more forgotten. Terry parked and sat in the truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at the ruin his grandfather had left behind. Then he got out and went to work. The shed was exactly as they'd left it weeks ago. Jars of samples on the shelves, maps rolled and stacked, Ezra's handwriting covering everything in careful notes. Terry had been through most of it already. But he needed more. He needed something that would survive Hastings's lawyers, something that couldn't be dismissed or buried in procedural technicalities. He started with the shelves, pulled down boxes, examined their contents, set aside anything that looked like official documentation permits, correspondence with county offices, rejection letters dating back decades. By midnight, he'd gone through everything above ground. Terry stood in the center of the shed, breathing the smell of old wood and dust, and tried to think like Ezra, a man who'd spent 58 years documenting a secret, a man who'd refused every offer, weathered every threat, waited for someone who'd understand. Where would he hide the proof? Terry knelt and examined the floorboards. Most were rotted, warped from years of moisture. But in the back corner near the wall, 3 boards looked different, newer, deliberately placed. He pulled them up, one at a time. Beneath them, wrapped in waterproof tarp, was a metal lockbox. Terry lifted it out. The box was heavy, sealed tight. No lock on it, just a simple latch. He opened it. Inside was a leather journal, thick and worn. Beneath it, manila folders stuffed with papers, photographs, water sample test results in sealed plastic bags, a USB drive taped to the inside of the lid. Terry pulled out the journal, opened it to the first page. Ezra Shaw, January 3rd, 1965. Property survey and mineral assessment. The handwriting was precise, methodical. Each entry dated, each observation documented with coordinates, depth measurements, chemical compositions. Terry turned pages, reading by flashlight as the night deepened around him. 1965. Initial surveys, unusual mineral concentrations in ridge formations. 1972. First Colton samples confirmed. Deposit appears extensive. 981. Approached by Hastings Mining Co. Offer declined. Suspect they know. 1987. Birth of grandson Terrence. Perhaps he will understand someday. Terry's hands stopped turning pages. He stared at his own name, written in his grandfather's hand 37 years ago. He kept reading. 1995. Hastings operation begins illegal dumping. Creek contamination detected. Documenting evidence 2003. Terrence discovers Beartooth deposit. Saw the news. He knows what I know now. He understands. 2007. Hastings pressure intensifying. Multiple offers. Threats of eminent domain. Holding firm 2001-13. Learned of Diane's death. Terrence has left the field. Understandable. But the work waits. Terry's throat tightened. He turned pages faster now. The entries became more urgent in recent years. Documentation of Hastings' contamination through detailed water samples showing heavy metal concentrations. Photographs of illegal dumping sites. Even testimonies from workers Hastings had paid to keep quiet. Men who'd written statements and signed them, trusting Ezra to keep them safe until the time was right. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before Ezra's death, November 2, 2023. Heart is failing. Doctor says months at best. I have done what I can. The deposit is documented. The evidence is collected. If Terry got this, he'll know. He's the only one who can finish it. Tell him the land is worth fighting for, not the money. The land itself, what it represents, what it can become if someone with knowledge and integrity takes responsibility for it. He'll understand. He always did. Terry closed the journal. He sat on the floor of the shed, surrounded by his grandfather's life's work, and the weight of it pressed down on him like physical force. Ezra had known. About the deposit, about Hastings, about the poisoning. He'd documented everything and waited 58 years for someone in the family who could use the knowledge properly, who had the expertise to understand it and the integrity to do something meaningful with it. And when Terry had walked away from geology, when he'd chosen invisibility and safety over the work, Ezra had understood, had kept waiting, had believed Terry would come back when the time was right. Terry opened the folders. Inside were photographs taken over decades. Hastings' trucks dumping waste into the creek in the dead of night. Rusted barrels stacked on shop property without permission. Workers installing drainage pipes that directed runoff deliberately onto Ezra's land. The evidence wasn't just thorough, it was devastating. Terry spread everything out on the shed floor. Journal.podpographs, test results, testimonies. The complete record of a conspiracy that had lasted 40 years. He worked through the night, organizing it, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline that would make sense to anyone who looked at it. By the time dawn broke through the shed's small window, Terry had assembled a case that no county board could ignore and no amount of political influence could bury. He sat back against the wall, exhausted but clear-headed. The morning light painted everything gold. The maps, the samples, the evidence that would either save this land or destroy him. Terry pulled out his phone. Called Imani. She answered on the second ring, groggy with sleep. Dad? Hey, baby. I'm sorry it's early. It's okay. Are you coming home? Terry looked at the journal in his hands, at his grandfather's life laid out in careful documentation, at the truth that had waited 6 decades to be told. Soon, he said. But first, I need to ask you something. That town hall meeting next week, the one I told you about. Yeah, I need you to come with me. Imani was quiet for a moment. Then, why? Terry chose his words carefully. Because I'm going to tell the truth. About who I was. About what this land really is. About everything. And I need you to see it. Are you scared? Terry smiled despite himself. His daughter, 8 years old, cutting straight to the center of things the way she always did. A little, he admitted, but not of them. I'm scared of staying quiet when I should speak. Grandpa Ezra would want you to talk, wouldn't he? Terry's eyes burned. Yeah, he would. Then we'll go, Imani said, like it was the simplest decision in the world. They talked for a few more minutes. Terry told her he loved her, promised he'd be home by evening, reminded her to eat breakfast. Normal things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that anchored a person when everything else was about to change. After he hung up, Terry sat in the shed for a long time, watching sunlight move across the floorboards. Then he carefully packed everything back into the lockbox journal, evidence, testimony, truth, and carried it to his truck. 1 week. He had 1 week to prepare for a confrontation that would end with either vindication or total destruction. But for the first time in 12 years, Terry Shaw felt like himself again. The town hall was packed, 200 people crammed into folding chairs. the air thick with the smell of old wood and stale coffee. Every eye was on Connor Hastings. He stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand, his face red beneath the fluorescent lights. His suit was tailored, expensive. His voice carried authority that came from 3 generations of owning everything he could see. "This man," Hastings said, pointing toward the back row, "doesn't know the first thing about mining or geology or what this land means." Terry sat perfectly still. His hands rested on his lap. His breathing was steady. Beside him, Imani gripped her backpack, small fingers tight on the straps. She was watching her father, waiting. The room waited too. Terry stood slowly, the kind of slow that makes people stop talking. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "I know quite a bit about geology." Hastings grinned. It didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, really? Enlighten us." Terry reached into the bag at his feet. He pulled out Ezra's journal, leather-bound, worn, heavy with years of documentation. He held it up so the room could see it. "My grandfather spent 58 years documenting what's buried on that land," Terry said. "Every sample, every survey, every chemical analysis. This is his work." He set the journal on the table in front of the county commissioners. Then he pulled out a folder. Inside were papers, credentials, certifications, publications. "My name is Dr. Terrence Shaw," Terry said. "PhD in geology from the Colorado School of Mines. I spent 15 years as a mineral surveyor. In 2007, I discovered the Beartooth Platinum deposit in Montana. It was worth $400 million. It made national news. Maybe some of you remember." A murmur rippled through the room. People shifted in their seats. A few pulled out phones, already searching. Hastings's grin faltered. Terry continued. His voice was quiet but steady. Each word landed with weight. "I know coltan when I see it. I know how to assess geological formations. I know what contamination looks like when it's been deliberate. And I know exactly what's on my grandfather's land." He pulled out core samples in sealed plastic, set them on the table. The dull gray rock caught the light. "This is coltan, high-grade, minimal impurities. The deposit extends through the ridge system in a vein that's one of only 3 economically viable sources in North America. Conservative value, $120 million. The murmur grew louder. Hastings stepped toward the microphone. "That's a hell of a claim from a man who drives a truck for a living." Terry didn't flinch. "I do drive a truck. I have for 12 years. But before that, I did this work on 6 continents. I can cite the mineral surveys your own company filed that prove you knew about the contamination. I can show the chemical composition of runoff that matches waste from your operation. I can demonstrate that the poisoning of Shaw property was systematic and intentional." He opened another folder. Inside were photographs, decades of them. Hastings's trucks dumping waste into the creek. Barrels stacked on Shaw land without permission. Workers installing drainage pipes in the dead of night. Terry laid them out one by one. "My grandfather documented everything. Water samples, testimonies from your employees, payments to inspectors, falsified environmental reports, 40 years of evidence that you used Shaw property as an illegal dumping ground to avoid remediation costs on your own land." A woman in the front row leaned forward. "Who are you accusing?" Terry looked directly at Hastings. "Connor Hastings. Hastings Energy Solutions. 3 generations of environmental violations covered up through political influence and intimidation." The noise in the room changed, became sharper. People looked at Hastings, then back at Terry, trying to reconcile what they were hearing. Hastings's face had gone from red to purple. "You're lying. You forged those documents. This is a con. I can provide chain of custody documentation," Terry said. "Lab results from independent testing facilities. Geological surveys that predate my grandfather's death. Everything is verifiable." He pulled out the final piece, a USB drive. "This contains digitized records of every entry in my grandfather's journal, every photograph, every testimony. I'm submitting it to the county commission tonight, and I'm requesting an immediate federal environmental investigation." One of the commissioners, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Mr. Shaw, if what you're saying is true, why did you walk away from your career? Why spend 12 years driving a truck?" The room went quiet. Terry looked at Imani. She was watching him with those eyes that always saw more than they should. "I lost someone I loved to this industry," Terry said quietly. "My wife. She died in a mining accident in South Africa 12 years ago. I swore I'd never touch geology again. Never think about minerals or extraction or any of it." His voice didn't waver, but his hands gripped the edge of the table. "I kept that promise for as long as I could. But my grandfather left me something worth more than money. He left me the truth, and the responsibility to do something with it. Terry picked up the journal, held it carefully. Ezra Shaw refused every offer for this land, weathered every threat, documented every crime. He waited 58 years for someone in this family who had the knowledge to understand what he'd found and the integrity to do the right thing with it. He looked around the room, at faces that had been hostile an hour ago and were now uncertain, at Hastings, whose confidence had cracked like cheap veneer, at the commissioners who were passing photographs between them with increasingly grim expressions. "I'm not here to exploit this community," Terry said. "I'm here to tell the truth. The land can be remediated. The deposit can be extracted responsibly. The profits can fund cleanup across this entire county. But first, the people responsible for decades of illegal contamination need to be held accountable." The chairman of the commission cleared his throat. He was an older man, weathered and careful. He looked at the evidence spread across the table, at Hastings, at Terry. "Mr. Hastings," the chairman said, "do you have a response to these allegations?" Hastings opened his mouth, closed it. His lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. Hastings started. His voice cracked. "This is all circumstantial. You can't." "The evidence speaks for itself," the chairman said. He looked at the other commissioners. They nodded. "Based on what's been presented tonight, this commission is calling for an immediate federal environmental investigation into Hastings Energy Solutions and all affiliated operations." People talking over each other, some standing, some pulling out phones. Hastings was shouting something about due process, his face twisted with fury and fear. But Terry wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at Imani. She was smiling at him, small and proud and absolutely certain. He'd stepped into the light, and he couldn't go back. The lawsuit arrived 4 days after the town hall meeting. Terry opened the envelope standing in his apartment kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter. Imani was at school. The silence felt heavy. Shaw v. Hastings Energy Solutions. Defamation. Fraud. Forgery of documents. Requesting damages of $5 million and immediate injunction against all claims regarding environmental contamination. Terry's hands didn't shake. He set the papers down carefully and called the number the EPA investigator had given him. "They're trying to scare you," the investigator said. "It won't work. We've already confirmed contamination at 3 separate sites matching your grandfather's documentation." "How long will this take?" "The investigation, months, maybe a year. But we're moving fast." Terry hung up and went to work. He had furniture to deliver. The firing came a week later. His supervisor called him into the office, wouldn't meet his eyes. Extended unauthorized absence. Company policy, nothing personal. Terry cleaned out his locker, drove home. Told Imani they'd be okay, even though his savings would last maybe 3 months. That night, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Shaw, this is Maria Cortez from the Appalachian Environmental Justice Coalition. We've been following your case." Terry listened. "We'd like to help. We have lawyers who specialize in environmental litigation, no cost to you. And we have connections with tribal environmental groups who might be interested in partnering on sustainable extraction if this goes forward." "Why would you help me?" "Because what Hastings did to your family's land, he's done to dozens of communities across 3 states. You're the first person with the documentation and expertise to prove it. We want to make sure this doesn't just end with your property. We want systemic change." Terry looked at Imani doing homework at the kitchen table, her tongue stuck out in concentration, braids coming loose at the ends. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk." The story started appearing 2 weeks later. Industry publications first, then local news. Former geologist questions mental stability after career collapse. Detroit man's dubious claims about West Virginia property. Sources close to investigation express skepticism. The sources were always anonymous. The implication was always clear. But other stories appeared too. EPA confirms contamination at multiple Hastings sites. Workers come forward with testimony of illegal dumping. Whistleblower reveals decades of environmental fraud. Terry stopped reading both kinds. He focused on what he could control. He met with lawyers, signed partnership agreements with the Environmental Coalition, worked with engineers on remediation plans that would clean the land before any extraction began, designed profit-sharing structures that would fund cleanup across the entire county, not just Shaw property. The work felt familiar. Good. Like putting on clothes that fit after years of wearing the wrong size. 6 weeks after the town hall, federal marshals arrived at Hastings Energy Solutions headquarters. They seized computers, files, financial records, froze assets. Hastings himself was photographed being let out in handcuffs, his red face twisted with rage. The indictment came down 3 days later. 18 federal charges: environmental fraud, falsifying records, bribery of public officials, conspiracy to commit environmental crimes. Terry saw it on the news. He was in his apartment, helping Imani with a science project about rock formation. She looked up when his phone buzzed with news alerts. "Is that about Mr. Hastings?" she asked. "Yeah." "Is he in trouble?" "Yes." Imani went back to her diagram of sedimentary layers. "Good," she said simply. Terry's phone kept buzzing. Reporters requesting interviews. The Environmental Coalition wanting statements. His old colleague Yolanda calling to say she'd seen the news and was proud of him. He answered Yolanda. Ignored the rest. Spring came. The EPA investigation concluded. The evidence was overwhelming. Hastings' operation had systematically violated environmental regulations for 40 years. The contamination extended across 1,200 acres. The cleanup costs would exceed $60 million. Hastings Energy Solutions was dissolved. Assets seized to fund remediation. Connor Hastings himself was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Terry watched the sentencing from Detroit. He didn't go to the courthouse, didn't need to see Hastings' face one more time. He had other work to do. His geological credentials were reinstated, published papers verified. The Michigan Licensing Board issued a formal apology for any doubt cast on his professional reputation. News coverage shifted. Detroit geologist uncovers massive environmental fraud. Former MIT lecturer returns to save Appalachian land. Father and daughter's quest for justice ends in vindication. Terry didn't read those either. 6 months after the town hall meeting, he stood on Ezra's property under clear blue sky. The farmhouse had been stabilized, roof repaired, foundation reinforced. Construction crews were breaking ground on an addition that would house classrooms and lab space. The Ezra Shaw Center for Environmental Geology, opening fall semester. Imani stood beside Terry wearing a hard hat 3 sizes too big. She held a shovel, ready for the ceremonial first dig. Around them, 50 people had gathered, county officials who'd voted for the federal investigation, workers from the Environmental Coalition, students from local schools who'd already enrolled for the center's first programs. Patricia Vance, the county commissioner who'd called for the investigation, approached Terry. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. Terry looked at the land. The creek was still orange, still poisoned, but remediation crews would start work next week. In 2 years, maybe 3, it would run clear again. "He waited a long time," Terry said, "for the right person." Vance smiled. He chose well. The ceremony was brief. Imani dug the first shovelful of earth. Terry dug the second. Cameras flashed. People applauded. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Imani tugged Terry's sleeve. She was pointing at something near the tree line. "Dad, look." Terry followed her gaze. The creek bed had shifted slightly during recent rain, exposing new rock formations along the bank. Imani was already walking toward it. Terry followed. They knelt together at the water's edge. Imani picked up a chunk of stone, turned it over in her small hands, squinted at it in the sunlight. "What is it?" she asked, holding it up. Terry examined it, rough gray surface. Familiar weight, not coltan this time, something else, possibly pyrite, possibly nothing valuable at all. But Imani was watching him with those eyes that always wanted to understand, always wanted to know, and Terry felt something settle in his chest that had been loose for 12 years. He smiled. "Let's find out together." 1 year later, the creek ran clear. Terry stood on the bank watching sunlight catch the water, turning it gold and silver where it moved over smooth stones. The orange was gone. The poison was gone. 3 years of remediation work had brought the land back to life. Behind him, the farmhouse stood solid against the sky. New roof, reinforced foundation, fresh paint the color of cream. A wooden sign hung above the door, Ezra Shaw Center for Environmental Geology. Inside, 23 students from 5 counties were attending summer geology camp. Terry could hear their voices through the open windows, questions, laughter, the sound of young people learning to see the world differently. Imani was with them. 10 years old now, taller, her braids pinned up in a style she'd learned to do herself. She stood at the front of the classroom explaining sedimentary rock formation to a group of 8-year-olds, using the same patient tone Terry had once used with her. "The layers build up over millions of years," she was saying. "Each one tells a story about what the earth was like when it formed." Terry smiled, turned back to the creek. He split his time now between Detroit and West Virginia, Monday through Wednesday, consulting for mining companies that wanted to do extraction, right, sustainable, clean, responsible. Thursday through Sunday here, teaching workshops, overseeing the center's programs, working with community members who'd become partners rather than strangers. The coltan deposit was being extracted carefully, methodically. Profits funded remediation across 3 counties. Waterways that had run orange for 40 years were being cleaned. Former Hastings employees, men who'd spent their lives in coal, were being retrained as environmental technicians, learning to heal what they'd once helped destroy. It was slow work, good work. Terry walked along the creek bed toward the old oak tree on the eastern edge of the property. He'd moved Diane's memorial stone here last spring, a simple granite marker with her name and the years of her life. He knelt beside it. The grass had grown in around the edges. "Hey," he said quietly, "I brought Imani down this weekend. She's teaching now. You'd be so proud of her." The wind moved through the oak leaves above him. "I'm doing the work again," Terry continued. "Not the way I did before. Different, better, maybe. I don't know. But it feels right." He touched the stone, cool and smooth beneath his palm. "I think about you every day, about what you'd say if you could see all this, the center, the kids learning, the land healing." His voice caught. "I think you'd tell me I waited too long, that I should have come back to this years ago." A bird called somewhere in the trees. "But I couldn't," Terry said. "Not until Ezra gave me a reason. Not until Imani needed to see that you fight for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He sat in the grass, back against the oak, looking out over the property. From here he could see the center, the remediation crews working on the far ridge, the clean water moving through the creek bed. Everything Ezra had protected for 58 years was finally becoming what it was meant to be. Footsteps approached through the grass. Imani appeared around the oak tree, slightly out of breath. "Dad, the kids are taking a break. Can I—" She stopped, saw where he was sitting. Her expression softened. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting." Imani came closer, looked at the memorial stone. She'd been 4 when Diane died, too young to remember much. But she knew the stories. Terry had made sure of that. "Hi, Mom," Imani said softly. They sat together in silence for a moment. Then Imani shifted, pulling something from her pocket. "I found this in the creek," she said, holding out a chunk of rock, "down by the new filtration system. I think it might be something." Terry took it, turned it over in his hands, gray-green, shot through with white veins. "Possibly epidote. Possibly just metamorphic rock worn smooth by water." "What do you think it is?" Imani asked. Terry looked at his daughter, at her bright eyes and careful hands, and the way she held herself like someone who expected the world to have answers if he knew how to look for them. He thought about Ezra, documenting samples for decades in a shed no one else understood. About Diane, who died doing work she loved because she believed knowledge mattered. About 12 years he'd spent invisible, and 1 year he'd spent becoming himself again. "I don't know yet," Terry said, "but let's find out together." Imani grinned. She pulled out her phone, already opening the geological reference app Terry had helped her download. They bent over the sample together, father and daughter, examining striations in crystal structure and the way light moved through the stone. Behind them, the creek flowed clean and bright. The farmhouse stood solid. Students laughed in the classroom. The land breathed and healed. And in the quiet space between questions and answers, Terry felt something that had been broken for a very long time finally settle into place, not finished, not perfect, but whole. The most valuable things Terry had learned were often the ones others dismissed as worthless. The junked farmhouse, the poisoned land, the grief-hollowed man who'd forgotten he had something to offer the world. All of it had been waiting to be recognized for what it truly was, waiting to be brought back to life by someone willing to see past the surface to the truth beneath.